a company executive, I won't mention any names, had an outage in their email one day. And the executive was so frustrated about this email outage on their local, maybe it was an Exchange server online or something locally that provided email services, that they took matters into their own hands and started forwarding. They created a rule in their inbox that said, I want a backup for my email. So if I have to work, I can always get to my email. And so he forwarded every message from his company account to his personal Gmail account, just forwarded it over. Now, the company account email was very well protected, as you would expect in a large company. However, the Gmail account had a very basic password with no multi-factor authentication. And the password that he used there, he had used all over the online world, presumably, because someone got hold of it from a breach, say at LinkedIn or Yahoo or one of these other locations. There's billions of accounts floating around on that of compromised websites where hackers pull down your username, your email, and your password, your favorite password. And they tried multiple combinations and eventually got into his Google account. So fast forward over the course of many months of monitoring his account, and he happened to be in finance and he was working on a deal to fund some project. And there was a wire transfer that got involved that was talked about in his email. So the hackers are sitting there watching the communications between company A and B, and they're saying, okay, it's almost time for us to send this $100,000 wire.
The Tom Screen podcast is owned and made possible by Ethical Marketing Service. If your business is struggling with Google or Facebook ads, maybe you're frustrated figuring it out, or there's a performance issue, Ethical Marketing Service has worked on hundreds of accounts and we can help in this area. We offer a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you would like to find out if we can help, it's a free, no salesy consultation call, and the link is in the description. Enjoy the episode. Thomas Green here with Ethical Marketing Service. On the episode today, we have Craig Taylor. Craig, welcome.
Thomas, hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
It is great to have you. Would you like to take a moment and tell the audience a bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So Craig Taylor, I'm a cybersecurity professional. I've been doing this for a long time, as we were just discussing, 25 years. I started in cybersecurity before there was a World Wide Web. That's how old I am. And have had my CISSP, which is the de facto standard certification in cybersecurity since 2001. I founded a company called CyberHoot, you see in the background here, 10 years ago, to help address what I'm now calling cyber literacy. We used to say cybersecurity skills and this and that, but the easiest way, Thomas, to understand what we do at CyberHoot and what everyone listening to this needs as a skill set in the 21st century is cyber literacy. We're probably familiar with computer literacy. You can work a keyboard. You can type probably 60 words a minute. And you can work a mouse and email and those sorts of things. But can you do it securely, confidently, efficiently? Probably not if you don't have cyber literacy skills, the ability to identify a social engineering attack through phishing or on your phone as a text message. That's called smishing, things of that nature. And so I founded CyberHoot 10 years ago to address this lack of awareness. The good news is it's not rocket science. We're not teaching really complicated things, but no one else out there, not in your educational system, in the US or UK or anywhere else in the world, seems to be focused on teaching these skills. And yet, we all need to use a computer and email to run our lives.
Thank you for the introduction. And you highlighted an area of, should we say, lack of knowledge. So I'd like to explore that. And that's in relation to phones, because my perspective is all via the computer. And I'm interested to talk to you about both. But the phone thing is not something I know anything about, actually, the hacking of a phone. But the thing I wanted to just clarify was your company. I perhaps wrongly assumed that you're doing cybersecurity on behalf of companies and that sort of thing. But is it fair to say that you're an educational company rather than a service-based company?
Both, actually. We have two arms. Our product offering is an educational subscription service that any company throughout the world can subscribe to. And we automatically deliver awareness training videos, as well as a much more positive outcome phishing test. We can get into the phishing component later. On the service side, we provide cybersecurity program development services. So we'll go in and perform a risk assessment of a company and identify issues, risks, and concerns around the data, the business processes, things that are of concern to protecting the company's operations, their people, and the data that they manage on behalf of their clients. And so we have two arms. One is the service offering. That's done under our virtual CISO services, Chief Information Security Officer. The other is the product arm, which is our SaaS platform. You can subscribe, sign up at cyberhoot.com/businesses and enroll and be up and running in minutes. It's very, very simple.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I wanted to ask you, there's a bunch of stories that I'm really interested in hearing from you. But the most recent, shall we say, experience I have with this is actually a cold call from someone who wanted to take remote access to my computer.
Oh,
so,
no.
Now I did, because I'm aware of that, should we say, those tactics, I did not buy into that particular phone call. But what are your thoughts on that strategy and how prevalent it is and what people should do?
Well, you were the recipient of a very common attack. All of these attacks, let me back up and just say, I study the attacks that occur on an annual basis in reports that are written by companies like Verizon. They do a data breach report and they collect all of the breach data, all of the attack data, and they sort of tease out the little commonalities of attacks. And they do this over time. They've been doing it for 20 plus years. They looked at 2008's report and they compared it to 2022. And the surprising thing was the attacks are the same. They're more sophisticated now. They're using better tools to perform the same attacks. They all boil down to this: password hygiene and social engineering. The phone call you received is an example of a social engineering attack. Most commonly, you receive those through phishing emails, but they can be over the telephone. They can call you. Sometimes you'll receive a text message that says, here's an offer or something. You click the link in the text and your phone will go to it. We can talk about that as well. But in the case of these phone calls and they say, oh, we found, most often actually what I've seen in the example you're talking about, remoting into your machine to help solve a problem, is because you visited a website and a pop-up comes and says, Thomas, you have a virus that we've identified and you can't proceed. And it puts a big unclosable window on your browser that says, call this Microsoft hotline to get this virus removed. And you call the number because it's right there. It's easy. People are lazy. They don't look it up on another browser or another computer on their phone. They call the Microsoft hotline that's been so conveniently presented to you on your screen. And they begin talking. And then they get convinced, oh, yes, there is a virus on my machine. I will give you remote access. And then what happens is that it's a hacker. It's not Microsoft. They will jump into your machine and they will troll around looking for critical and sensitive data. Perhaps you have a file that says passwords. That's their favorite thing to grab. Or you might have a file that says tax return, or, I don't know if the UK has social security numbers. I know in Canada we had SINs, social insurance numbers. You must have something similar. Those are very sensitive because they control your identity. And your identity can be stolen with things like your birthday and your social insurance number and address and those kinds of things. So they're looking for this kind of stuff. Now, if they don't find anything useful, they can install something of a remote access Trojan so they can get back in at their leisure. They could encrypt your hard drive with some form of a ransomware attack that then you have to pay some fee to have unencrypted. So those are all common attacks. Many times they're not through a phone call to begin. They're just you randomly browsing the internet. But sometimes you can do that through the receipt of a phone call.
Well, thank you for that. And I know you've mentioned the text message way of getting into someone's phone. Are there any other ways? Because although I know a lot about the attacks for computers, I don't know really anything about the phone. So is that the only way that someone can take control of your phone?
No, there are many ways. In fact, We'll start from the following assumption. Any software ever written has had bugs, bugs that could lead to the compromise of the device on which the software runs. Many times we hear about that on a computer. It's Microsoft's Patch Tuesday. You need to patch your computer because you could open a file and it could exploit something that's wrong with your computer. The same principle applies to your phone. And so you will hear, and we've seen a lot of these in recent months, quite honestly, with the release of new operating systems for iOS. 17 just came out, and before that, 16 and 15 and so on. There were remote access vulnerabilities or abilities for a hacker to send you a file or send you a very specially crafted text message that if you opened, it would exploit your device. The take-home message of all of this is you need to keep your devices up to date. You need to patch them. You need to upgrade them. I had a family member who loved her iPhone, whatever version. It was 5 years old. It was version 14 of iOS. And she says, I don't want to update because everything changes. And then I have to learn all the new, whiz-bang features that I don't know how to operate. I just want to stay on this forever. And that's, on the one hand, I understand the need and the desire to not have things changing constantly. But on the other hand, that accumulates all kinds of vulnerabilities that hackers have identified, putting herself at risk in her data. So keep things patched. The other trick is to turn your services off that you're not using. If you're not using Bluetooth, disable it. If you're not using Wi-Fi, disable it. It might save you a little bit of battery, but more importantly, there are attacks that can be performed in the background just by having those services enabled on your phone.
So would you say it's a fair conclusion that the more software or apps that you have on your phone, the more probable it is that you're going to be hacked?
I would put it a slightly different way, Thomas, because those different software applications, yes, they can have bugs. But in general, the hackers are targeting the operating system for the compromise of the device kind of bug. Where the applications play into a breach of your security is in the data they contain and the privileges that you enable for them. For example, we might all have read an article or heard people say, oh, I was just talking to my wife or my son or daughter about X, and I got an ad on my phone or in Facebook for this, for Y, and it was tied right to what I'd just been speaking of, and it happened so quickly. Well, if you've given microphone access to different applications, they could listen in the background and then present ads that are tied to the things they hear. That seems like an extreme thing, but I have read articles that show that has happened. Is it common today? No. Many of these companies have been slapped on the wrist for doing so. But you have to always be aware of the privileges, the permissions you're giving applications. If they don't need your location data, don't allow an application to have access to your location. If they don't need to access the microphone or the camera or any of those things, don't enable those. The other thing to do is always make sure you're using the App Store or the Play Store, because Microsoft, Google, and Apple are trying very hard to weed out applications that are, not legitimate. They might be simply put to the App Store or the Google Play Store to collect data on you. And it's a ruse for what they claim to be doing. It might be, some text documentation app, and it's really just trying to sort through your phone to find privileged information and put it to someone else to sell it to a bidder. So use reputable apps, download them only from the recommended stores. Don't go or root your phone or what that means is don't try to break the operating system security controls and then place on it software from websites that aren't in the App Store or that sort of thing. That can lead to other problems as well. And just remember those permissions. That's a big component of it.
Thank you for that. I'd also like to follow up on, based on what you're saying about phones and then also computers, I'd like to know your thoughts on online banking and what's your approach to it in terms of everything you know? How do you go about online banking?
So online banking is actually safer than what you might first think. simply because the banks have forced us into leveraging what's called multi-factor authentication. So to identify ourselves to the bank, we have to give two of three different identifiers. Multi-factor is presenting two of three unique identifiers for a person or an identity. Something you know, which is typically a password, something you have, maybe it's a mobile device and it receives a text message, although that is in itself sometimes not as strong as, say, an authenticator app, or something you are, a face print or a voice identifier or a thumbprint. We unlock our phones with Face ID. That's something you are. And when you reboot the phone, you have to provide a passcode. That's something you know. So any two of those are pretty good for the average person to log into their bank and be who they say they are. Now, I spent, 5 or 6 hours this week on a security incident where an individual received an email. It was an invoice. They opened it. It queried for a password to their Microsoft account, because they knew the individual on the other end, and they sometimes interacted with invoices in this fashion, they provided their credentials. And it was a ruse. It was an attack that stole her credentials as well as her multi-factor session token. Now, this is going to sound complicated, but there is a token that gets placed on your device when you've multi-factor authenticated via something you are, know, and are. And they can steal that token and then use it to log into a multi-factor protected account. In this case, it was an email. And we spent a few hours trying to recover from that because there was some significant damage done. They scraped her inbox of 850 email addresses and then shot out messages to all of those individuals with a new invoice that did the same thing and perpetuated the attack. But we've blogged about it at CyberHoot. If you go to cyberhoot.com/blog, search on Evil Proxy. Evil Proxy is the attack malware that does this sophisticated attack. Remember, I mentioned to you at the beginning, social engineering has not changed. It's the same attack forms. Getting someone to do something that they shouldn't, which is put in a username and a password on an email that they really shouldn't be responding to, is a social engineering attack. The sophistication now has improved to where they can steal these session tokens and bypass some of the multi-factor. So there are really risky things along those lines. I haven't seen that happen in the terms or in the form of banking type compromises. I do my banking online. I find the convenience of it quite good. There are also protections in place with, credit card transactions that if your card is stolen, you're not held liable in most cases for the transactions that are done there. So some of those online banking payment systems, there are new payment systems in the US called Venmo, and I've used some other international payment systems. It's very convenient, and the number of people that are attacked in those fashions aren't as prevalent as the ones that are attacked with business email compromise or ransomware through phishing attacks. It's a lot lower commonality or frequency. Is it zero? Absolutely not. Are there risks? Yes. Best advice is to stay aware of what those risks are. Always enable that multi-factor. Most banks require it. They don't give you an option. So you have to enable multi-factor. And be suspicious. Learn about social engineering. Learn about password hygiene. Adopt a password manager, for example, so that the banking password you use is only used for that one bank, and you use a different password completely unrelated for any other banking or any other website online. Every account you have is a unique password. The only way I've found to do that, and what most cyber professionals say is a password manager, is the way to accomplish that password hygiene method.
Well, it's a nice segue into what I really wanted to talk to you today, which is some of the, I don't know if this is the right term, but some of the most crazy stories that you've experienced over your career. So what comes to mind for you in terms of the most crazy stories about either individuals or companies being hacked?
Well, I have two that I could bring up. One is an origin story for CyberHoot. 10 years ago, I was between jobs and consulting for a company as a CISO, a virtual or fractional CISO. And we had an incident that came up, and we were scratching our heads on how this could possibly have happened. There was a new woman who had been hired right out of college. She had put it on LinkedIn. Hey, I'm excited. I started at this company. And she got an email from the president of the company saying, dear, employee, would you mind going out and buying 10 gift cards for me, $100 a piece, because it's the end of quarter and we want to give them to our hardest working employees. And I need your help. She was in the HR department. And so she dutifully did that. And then, the email back to her was, that was fantastic. Thank you for buying the cards, scratching the backs off, taking an image of them and sending it to me. Again, from the president of the company. She was so excited for being such a, responsive employee. They kept doing this over and over again. And over the course of maybe 2 weeks, she had maxed out her credit card account and bought over $24,000 of $100 gift cards and sent them to who she thought was the president before anyone in the company realized what was going on. Obviously, this was a classic gift cards scam where you get an email that says, hey, I'm in a meeting, but do you have a moment? I need you to do something for me. And the person responds. And if you look at the email address, it looks almost perfectly identical to what you would expect your president's email to be, but it might be off by one letter. They might have taken an I and made it an L, or an O and made it a 0. It just is almost indecipherably different, but it's not from the president. So that story got me really frustrated with the lack of simple knowledge around social engineering. I said, I've got to help these smaller companies with their cybersecurity literacy. And I founded CyberHoot. So that's one of our origin stories. Another one that I had was the story of a $100,000 wire transfer that disappeared forever. A company executive, I won't mention any names, had an outage in their email one day. And the executive was so frustrated about this email outage on their local, maybe it was an Exchange server online or something locally that provided email services, that they took matters into their own hands and started forwarding. They created a rule in their inbox that said, I want a backup for my email. So if I have to work, I can always get to my email. And so he forwarded every message from his company account to his personal Gmail account, just forwarded it over. Now, the company account email was very well protected, as you would expect in a large company. However, the Gmail account had a very basic password with no multi-factor authentication. And the password that he used there, he had used all over the online world, presumably, because someone got hold of it from a breach, say at LinkedIn or Yahoo or one of these other locations. There's billions of accounts floating around on that of compromised websites where hackers pull down your username, your email, and your password, your favorite password. And they tried multiple combinations and eventually got into his Google account. So fast forward over the course of many months of monitoring his account, and he happened to be in finance and he was working on a deal to fund some project. And there was a wire transfer that got involved that was talked about in his email. So the hackers are sitting there watching the communications between company A and B, and they're saying, okay, it's almost time for us to send this $100,000 wire. Well, at that moment, the hacker takes over this account and interjects that we have a banking issue and there's new wiring instructions, and here they are. And in the exact tone and temper of the communications that have been going on, because the hacker's been reading the email unbeknownst to anyone. They registered a domain to conclude all of these communications, which was off by one letter. So if the company was acmecorp.com, the legitimate company, the registered domain, which was no more than 2 weeks old, was Acme Corp, where the O in Corp was a 0, for example, and started the communications that way so that you could eliminate this executive from the wiring transfer back and forth. Oh, why are you under audit? Why is the bank number changing? Because it is. I apologize. I know it's inconvenient. And, all the communication, it's social engineering at its finest. Finally, the $100,000 gets sent. A few weeks later, both companies are wondering, where did the money go? Did you send it? Yes, we sent it. No, we didn't get it. Why didn't you get it? Traces turn up that it was sent to the wrong banking information, and it was never recovered. And, at $100,000, that sounds like an enormous amount of funds, but I have read about $1 million wire transfers, $700,000 wire transfers, and $25,000 wire transfers. This is rampant. If you go to the FBI website, you can see that this wire transfer fraud is one of the largest social engineering losses that companies face in their tracking of these kinds of breaches. So those are two examples of social engineering that leads to financial loss for companies. And it's so easily addressed if you can educate people about the attacks that are out there, the social engineering attacks. For example, the wiring transfer, you never, ever wire or change banking information without picking up the phone and speaking to the other party and saying, okay, I'm just confirming the numbers that you've given me to change the wiring instructions. And they'll either say, yes, that's the right number. And yes, we need it. And you know who you're talking to. Or they'll say, what are you talking about? I have no idea what you're talking. We're not doing any change of wiring. And then you're onto the scheme.
Well, thank you for that. I don't know why this sort of occurs to me, but the interesting thing about the second example you gave was that there's a little bit of liability on both parts, in the sense that there was the individual who forwarded their email to a unprotected Gmail, and then the company who paid the funds, they didn't check that it was, as you say, that it was genuine. So do you ever get involved in, where the blame lies, or is it just like a messy legal type scenario that happens?
I don't get directly involved. I make a write-up of the incident and the facts of the case, and then insurance providers and legals. Oftentimes it does go to legal because of the amounts of these sums. Most often in the past, I would say 15 to 5 years ago, it was a claim on your cyber insurance. However, most cyber insurance is calling out measures like social engineering training, phishing testing, the testing and training and delivery of security systems within a company, wherein you have to prove that you did all of these things in order to file a claim and be paid back if still an accident occurs. And so we're seeing more claims being rejected because companies are saying one thing on their cyber insurance application, but they're not fulfilling those requirements as easy as they are. And the sad thing is, if you were to lose $10,000, that could potentially pay for 10 years of cyber education and testing of your employees. Just with one incident, it's so cheap to provide this awareness training. The cost in terms of time is 5 to 7 minutes a month. And the costs are not that great. So I don't get involved in the legal ramifications of those events. Typically, I have not had to testify in a court of law. I do write them up and I explain what happened and how they happened and what to do not to prevent them from occurring. But I let the insurance companies and lawyers fight those battles.
And the first example that you gave, which is the new employee, are you aware whether she kept her job, whether she was whether she was blamed? What was the fallout of that?
I believe that if memory serves me correctly, she was not able to keep her position for the long term. We might have been 6 months in. There were other things, but I can't claim direct knowledge of that. I wasn't involved in that piece of it. The reality is, though, with social media as it is, hackers are monitoring all of our social media public feeds, and they are monitoring to take advantage of changes in situations, right? New employees who aren't familiar with HR or leadership and are asked to do things need to be on the lookout for those vultures that are circling overhead as hackers, waiting to swoop down and take advantage of some new employee's lack of awareness or knowledge.
Well, you make a good point about the social media side of this conversation. Are you aware of the types of, I don't know, scams, for lack of a better term, around the hacking of social media accounts?
Well, then the most simplest terms, right? If you go on vacation and you publish your pictures from a remote location on social media about how exciting and great it is to be, in the Caribbean or in the south of France, your house may be targeted for a physical theft, right? Because this is information that everyone wants to know. No one's home for 2 weeks. Great. Now I can do that. The other thing is that there's something that is a little bit more sophisticated in terms of social engineering attack. The bulk of email. So I read this yesterday. 1.2% of every email online is a malicious email of some kind or another. It's an attack. Most of them are generic. Hackers can send out millions of messages to millions of recipients, hoping that they get 0.1%. So 1 out of 10,000 or 1 out of 100,000 will respond, and it's lucrative enough and financially beneficial that they can make a living doing that. But those are very blasé, generic phishing attempts. What really catches most people is when they have what's known as a spear phishing attempt against them. So I'll give you, for example, let's say there's a high-level executive at a company and he has a dog and he's complaining on social media that he just paid thousands of dollars to the veterinarian to solve a problem with his dog. And then he gets an email that says, here's your invoice for the veterinary bill. We heard you complaining about it and we've reduced it. And so you just have to pay half of that fee here. Click here to proceed. Pops up a message that says, provide your credentials to log into your email account, whatever. And it seems so legitimate because it's based on real events that just happened that only the veterinarian in the executive's mind, only the veterinarian and I know about that. They don't realize that the whole world's reading their social media feed. And so they fall victim to it. And it's called a spear phishing attack. It takes advantage of trusting relationships between, say, and maybe even they used a domain that was similar to the veterinarian email address domain. They'll register a domain on very quickly to send these requests. Maybe it just says pay half the bill, and the bill is paid. Is nothing more than just taking half of the veterinarian bill. So instead of $5,000, it's $2,500, but it's been paid to a hacker, not to the actual veterinarian. There are many different versions of that. Social media is a gold mine for hackers who want to tailor their phishing attacks. We call it spear phishing because they're targeting very individuals, not multiple individuals.
I've heard of posts go out of like, I need help type thing. I please send funds,
Yes.
And then family members end up sending those funds. But I wanted to, it's a slight change of pace because I don't know why. I'm just intrigued to know whether or not you've been hacked yourself.
Well, the answer to that is not that I'm aware of. The FBI is fond of saying this quote: there are two kinds of companies in this world, those that know they've been hacked and those that don't know they've been hacked, right? I've probably been hacked in minor ways. There's been no financial fraud that I'm aware of. In the US, we have credit agencies, and we can lock our credit reports in the US across all of the credit agencies. I've written about this in articles on our blog, and that prevents anyone, including myself, from taking credit out in my name, because in the US, you cannot give credit to someone without a credit score attached to it, because you don't know the measurement of risk for this person to pay back the funds. So if you lock your credit, it's better than, thousands of services that are out there that say, we'll monitor your credit. And so if you're hacked, we'll tell you, which is far too late. It's like saying, I don't need fire alarms or fire sprinklers in my house because I got a fire station next door. They'll put out any fire that starts. Well, that's too late. I've already got a fire. Why not prevent the fire from starting? So that's what we do. But personally, I will tell you an example of a time I was socially engineered and phished. This is embarrassing, but hey, if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone, right? I returned from vacation. And, when you return from vacation, you have an inbox with 200 plus messages, maybe more than that. And you're reading through it. And I happened upon an email from a friend of mine who I hadn't heard from him from a while. And it was a LinkedIn recommendation for me. And I was like, wow, that's great. why would he take the time to write a recommendation for me? And in my, self-aggrandizing way, I thought, oh yeah, I deserve this. So let me go read it. So I clicked the link in the email. It looked like a perfect LinkedIn email. And I land on the LinkedIn login page. And my password manager, which sits in the background monitoring the domains that I go to put in the username and the password to log me into LinkedIn, just sat there dumb as a post. It didn't fill in the credentials. I no longer know my credentials. This was a saving grace because my password manager just randomly creates the passwords for me and sticks them in, and they're great big 20-character jubbly, very randomized strings of characters. I couldn't tell you what my password was. Had I known it, I might have fallen for typing it in manually because I would have blamed the password manager for not working. But I'm looking at it and I'm refreshing the page. I'm trying to figure out why it's not logging in. And then I look at the domain name. I was on a server somewhere in Italy. It was the last domain was .it, which is Italy. And I was like, oh, you gotta be kidding. I clicked on a phishing link, took me to a login at LinkedIn. And I was only saved by my best practices of password manager hygiene. But, I fell for it. And if you're not vigilant, you can fall for these things fairly quickly.
Well, you alluded to something earlier in your story about the unprotected Gmail. They've introduced mandatory two-step verification. So you log in, you have to get a text in order to log in. What do you think about the security of that? Because my cybersecurity excuse at the moment is that because I have that, I don't have to worry about getting hacked because it has to go to a phone and I have to type the code in.
Well, you might be right, but I don't think that is actually the case. Two-step verification or multi-factor is good and it is appropriate. But in the latest security recommendations, text-based or SMS-based multi-factor has been deprecated. What that means is they would prefer you not use it. Most banks, including some of my own banks, still use it. Is it good? It's okay. Is it great? It is not, because 3 or 4 different attacks can occur. The text messaging system is on a private network controlled by a lot of big communications companies, but it is not immune from hackers trolling about, monitoring for these text messages going by. They're not encrypted. It's unencrypted data. You can have someone sitting in your neighborhood who has targeted you specifically and who has got a Wi-Fi or a wireless scanner that can slurp that data out, that text message code out of the airwaves without your knowledge. They can call your mobile carrier and convince the, $12 an hour or maybe £6 an hour help desk person that you've got a new phone and you need to transfer this SIM to my SIM and then take over your phone number so they get the text message. Then you're only as good as your password, which if you're relying solely on text message, you might not be as careful with the unique passwords that you ought to be using on every account. So there are multiple ways to bypass SMS-based text messaging. What's the next level up is the Authenticator app. You may have seen a QR code you can scan. It puts it into an application like Google Authenticator, Microsoft Authenticator, something else. And that has a random 6-digit code that rotates. It never leaves your phone. So there's nothing for someone out there to capture, to present and use that to get onto that multi-factor or second factor. That's still not the best method. The best is a hardware token. 25 years ago, I was using a little RSA hardware device. It's a secure ID token, and it had a 6-digit code on the front of it. It wasn't tied to a phone that maybe someone could hack into my phone to see the authentication message or the authenticator code. Or on my computer, if I had the Authenticator app on my computer, that could be a compromised device. A hardware token is awfully hard to compromise. I don't know anyone that can take that, duplicate it, and then use it to bypass your multi-factor. So the most secure second factor is that something you have, which is a hardware token. So that's the best of the best.
Well, thank you for that. So you've burst my bubble, but you've done me a favor at the same time. So I appreciate it. I don't like walking around being wrong. So I appreciate your expertise. I suppose the final question that I had in relation to protecting yourself is around, you've alluded to something already, which is people who use the same password on multiple services. So
Yes.
I think I know what your opinion is already, or your expertise is. But at the same time, there are people undoubtedly that have that same password across the whole internet for everything. So if you were to speak directly to them, what would you say to them?
I would say the following are known facts. 90+% of breaches are tied back to human error. That boils into two main flaws: social engineering, which I've told you has remained constant over the last 25 years, and password hygiene. The only way to have strong password hygiene, and what I mean by that is every website, every service, every account you own has a unique, long and strong password. And when I say long, I don't mean 10 characters. Okay. In the not too distant past, security researchers, including NIST, the US National Institute of Standards and Technology, in 2003, said 9-character complex passwords, change them every 90 days. They've rescinded that because it caused everyone to cheat. They would write down their password. They would add a March, April, May, June extension to their password when they had to change it every 90 days. They would put a prefix that's predictable or a suffix on the password. It just caused everyone to cheat. Now they recommend 12 or longer character passwords stored in a password manager that are randomly generated and inserted via that password manager. Protected with multi-factor authentication to unlock the password manager. All password managers encrypt that data with military-grade encryption standards. But as I said earlier, every software ever written has had bugs in it. You have to keep your password managers patched. You have to be aware of listening to what's going on in the industry. A password manager is a necessary evil in our opinions as cybersecurity professionals. It's not perfect, but it is far better than anything else anyone has been able to accomplish on their own. I have 400 different accounts in my password manager. I don't know but 2 passwords: the master password to unlock my computer in the morning when I boot it up, and the master password to unlock my password manager. Those are the 2 that I know. They are passphrases that are 20+ characters long. And from there, I can go about my day. I've taught many, many people to use password managers, from my children to grandparents, and it is possible. And they love it once they get good at it, because it is secure, it is efficient, and it takes away my mother had this notebook with scratches and chicken scratches and scribbled out pages and recopied pages. And she couldn't find this and that and the other thing. And she's now using a password manager to run her online life.
Do you have any concerns at all about the password manager getting hacked, or is it less likely?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We've blogged about this. In fact, there is one vendor I won't mention that has had some issues, and we've moved people away from that vendor. But there are things that most application developers need to do in order to secure their application. And primarily that is having a pen test and some vulnerability scans and some third-party assessments of what you've built, right? If I build something, or let's say I write an article, I think that article is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it says exactly what I want it to say. I'll come back the next day and read it and say, what was I thinking? Software is the same way. You can write software and find, you think it does exactly what you thought it should do, but there are bugs latent in it. So you have to have other people, other firms, other automated processes come in and audit what you do, especially in the cybersecurity realm, to validate that there aren't bugs in it. You need to have a bug bounty program in your as a password manager to reward individuals who report to you bugs they found in your application. Those are mitigating controls to the risk of bugs in a password manager. But every other alternative to a password manager is worse. People will reuse passwords that have been breached and exposed online, and they will come back. Hackers will use those to exploit it in your life. So at the end of the day, it is a necessary evil to adopt and learn a password manager. It is important for you to learn social engineering, that this occurs, and it can occur in multiple facets: over the phone, in text messaging, in email, most primarily, to enable multi-factor authentication on all of your critical accounts, banking, email, those kinds of things. Those are measures that we all take to protect ourselves. And by and large, that's a pretty good mitigation of the risk. Does that help, Thomas?
It's a great answer. And I really appreciate the value today, because I think if people listen, then they're so much further ahead than they otherwise would be. So I appreciate it a lot. Is there anything that I should have asked you today?
No, but I will. I think you did a great job of covering the foundational topics. What I would also tell you, though, Thomas, is my company CyberHoot is free for cyber literacy training for individuals. So if you're listening to this and say, I really should bone up on my own cyber literacy, go to cyberhoot.com. I think it's /individuals, and you can register and take 6 videos that we talk about the things we're talking about today in very basic terms, with a little quiz at the end. We give you an interactive phishing exercise that teaches you how to spot and avoid phishing activities. And this is 100% free. It's Cybersecurity Awareness Month in the United States. I think it may be in England as well. I know it is in Australia. And any company that signs up gets 60 days free right now in our platform to educate and create cyber literacy in their employees. Normally it's 30 days. We're doubling it for the Awareness Month. But the time to start your cyber literacy journey is now. You don't want to be reacting to an incident and then decide it's time to do this, because you've already lost potentially thousands of dollars in downtime and reputation and all kinds of bad things that can occur. Be proactive about this and learn your cyber literacy. Teach your employees cyber literacy, because no one else is going to do it. You have to do it for yourself.
And just a reminder of where people should go if they want to connect with you.
cyberhoot.com. And, I'm on LinkedIn and I'm on different social media platforms, but you can email me sales@cyberhoot.com and we will get back to you. Or those are 2 methods: support at cyberhoot.com, sales@cyberhoot.com.
Great. Thank you for that. And thank you for being a great guest today.
My pleasure, Thomas. Thank you for your time. Great questions. I hope we've educated a few of your listeners. That would be great.